The topic I bring with me today is liable to bring about some fundamental disagreements and maybe some consternating emotions. Be forewarned that your religious beliefs will be heavily questioned in the following minutes. Though when they are, please know that this is not because I seek to convert you to some other school of thought. I simply want to make sure that you are thinking in the first place. As an atheist, I do not claim to have all of the answers about life by any means. None of us have any empirical way of knowing if there really is a God or an afterlife. As human beings, we shall only come to understand a microcosm of these fundamental issues. Our lifespan is just too short, and we have too many preoccupations. So if an organized religion claims that they have discovered the exact blueprints of how the universe works and how all humans should conduct themselves, please excuse my reluctance to believe them, because they have no way of knowing more than I do. The topic I bring with me today is the matter of what happens to us after we die. Human beings are by nature quite evasive about contemplating their own mortality. They look for a way to deny it or to distract themselves from it. Wouldn't it be nice if we could somehow unchain from our backs the bonds of mortality? If we could continue on living after we die, somehow magically. This is where the idea of heaven comes into play, if you couldn't tell already. Just ask yourself the following question. Doesn't it sound like a very anthropogenic, that means created by humans, concept that our souls fly away to a utopian kingdom in the sky if we just listen to our pastor or our rabbi or, our other religious leader? I believe that heaven is a fictitious place that was fabricated as a morphine drip to ease fear over death. It's a win-win for both parties if you really look at it, because the church gets more people to drink their tainted Kool-Aid, and the church-goers get an opiate to numb their cumbersome sense of logic. Since death is the ultimate change, and fear is the natural response triggered by change, it's understandable that one would try to invent a refuge from it, isn't it? John Lennon once asked us to imagine that there was no such thing as heaven. He said such a thing would be easy to accomplish if you just tried. However, when your image of death is as utopian as the Christian idea of heaven, it's a much harder task. Why would you trade your notion of this beautiful kingdom in the sky for this rigor mortis-inducing idea that we are all just worm food waiting to be processed? That's terrifying, I understand. I implore you, however, not to envision death as a horrible fate full of blood-plastered screams and paralyzing terror. It doesn't have to be like that, I promise you. We all become part of the trees and the flowers in time. And that's just science. I'm not trying to sound like Pocahontas. We don't just rot pointlessly without a further destiny to fulfill. Our dispersion fuels the creation of new life in the universe and beauty that will be enjoyed by posterity. Becoming worm food is not the only alternative to the sexually repressed, self-loathing, dog-shit sundae of judgmentality they've been reaming down your esophagus at the Catholic Church for however long you've been alive. The first law of thermodynamics, which isn't a controversial branch of science like evolution, and is pretty much universally accepted by scientists of all faiths, states that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, period. Therefore, some bearded guy in the sky didn't get out of bed one day and decide that he was going to make the universe out of thin air. Our atoms have been around the universe for 13 billion years. They have been part of the cosmos, part of the flowers, part of the dinosaurs, part of the ocean, part of another living person. You do not ever really die because the accumulation of matter that makes you up and the energy that gives you life radiate outward infinitely. When my great-grandmother died, this is a personal example, my mother told me that she could feel the life force leave. The physical elements and spiritual energy that define each and every one of you don't just drop off the face of the earth. They survive infinitely in a plethora of new forms. The atoms that make up your brain have been part of Hitler, Socrates, Moses, or maybe even Jesus himself, if he wasn't just made up too. You make the world a beautiful place by getting up every day, and that doesn't stop when you die. Natural death is not something to fear or try to escape from. It isn't something to bemoan or to try to drown out your thoughts with TV, sex, and other menial distractions. And it isn't something you should try to deny through the opiate of religion. You don't need to believe that a vengeful, judgmental God is watching over you and deciding your death may be a horrifying experience if you don't play nice by his rules. You don't need some phony Candyland dream of the afterlife, because becoming one with nature trumps meeting the ghost of a self-proclaimed Messiah who died 2,000 years ago. If God created man in his image, but all people are inherently sinful, then this God guy must be a pretty rotten motherfucker too. He let Hitler stick those Jews in the oven. He let witches be burned at the cross in his name. He led you to believe that you were nothing without him and everything through him. What does a heretic with a God complex getting nailed to a tree have to do with your sins? As Doug Stanhope, the comedian, said, "Worship me. 2,000 years ago, I hit myself in the foot with a shovel for your mortgage." He says that you shouldn't trust anyone else besides him because they are all out to get you. He says you'll be forsaken forever if you leave him. This sounds a lot like somebody trying to give you Stockholm Syndrome. He takes credit for all of your accomplishments by saying that you couldn't do it without him, and you actually come to thank him every time you succeed. He'll punish you if you ever doubt his will. He sounds a lot like an abusive father. I mean, good Lord. He wasn't the first jerk or the last person crucified by the Romans. It was actually quite regular. And, that's a totalitarian state putting down uprisings. That continues to this day. Nor was he the last person to declare himself God and be followed by a number of people. He wasn't the first or the last guy who guilted you into doing something perverse or irrational like the Crusades, the Salem witch hunt, or joining the Republican Party if you want to go more modern. You were good enough on your own, and you don't need the dogma of an ancient dickbag encumbering you as you break out of your cocoon and see the world. Again, I quote Doug Stanhope, "If they weren't hammering that stuff into your head when it was still soft, you'd never buy it. You wouldn't go into a bookstore and find a Bible and say, this sounds logical. Hey, Donnie, I found the meaning of life." You don't need to lie to yourself anymore. You don't need heaven to live on eternally. Next time you're about to go to church, remember several more recent people who have proclaimed themselves as a link to God. David Koresh, Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Marshall Applewhite, and the Pope. Love yourself, and don't let some old collection of pedophiles, homophobes, and judgmental evangelical proselytizers tell you that you aren't good enough without Jesus and some plastic fishbowl afterlife to trudge forth to like a lemming off a cliff. You will live and you will die, but that is not the end. It is just a new beginning, my friends.